Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you've had a nice week. We are almost, we are at the hump. It's hump day, Wednesday, baby. And it's a great Wednesday because we learned last night that the Indiana football Hoosiers are a lock for the college football playoff, coming in ranked number 9. If the playoff started today, they would be the 10 seed because, Boise State, winner of the Big 12. So someone would leap them and grab the bye and be so that would make them the 10 seed. I don't think there's a world where they move up. Maybe the committee decides to drop SMU, which would be really surprising. I think would upset a whole lot of people if that happened. So I don't think that there's a world where they move up. Currently ranked 9th. The only other team I could see them potentially dropping out of the college football playoff would be Boise State, but Boise State is ranked behind Indiana, and if Boise State lost, then some other team would jump in front of them, pushing them back down to the 10 seed. So either way, I don't imagine your Indiana Hoosiers being a higher seed than 10. Maybe they get dropped lower. Maybe that's possible depending on how things shake out. But yeah, as of right now, they're sitting in that 10 seed spot, and that's where they probably should be. Like, Indiana should probably be the 10 seed. That feels like the right spot for them based off of resume and all those things. Okay? Like, let's just be honest here. If things hold the way that they are now, then, Indiana's going to be the 10 seed. And when you look at the 9 teams that will be seated in front of them, they will be deserving to be seated in front of them based off resume, even though they may not actually be better, but they deserve to be. And, deserving is sadly something that matters when we rank teams for college football. Like, for example, I don't think that Penn State, Notre Dame, or SMU are better than Indiana. Don't think any of them are. But they deserve to be seated higher than Indiana because Penn State played a slightly tougher schedule than Indiana did. It's why they're playing in the Big Ten title game against Oregon as opposed to Indiana, because they had to look at their opponents. They had to look at their conference opponents' win percentage, and Penn State's conference opponents' win percentage was higher than Indiana's. And so they get the nod to play in the Big Ten title game, and Indiana doesn't. So Penn State played a tougher schedule. So yes, they deserve to be ranked in front of Indiana, even though I think Indiana is better than them. Notre Dame's win over Texas A&M is better than any win that Indiana has. So even though I think Indiana is better than Notre Dame, they do deserve. There's no probably about it. They deserve to be seated in front of Indiana. Like, Notre Dame's win over USC is on par with a lot of the wins that Indiana has this year. Notre Dame's wins over Army, Navy, and Georgia Tech are on par with, or maybe even better than, a lot of Indiana's wins this year. So, to harp on Notre Dame a little more, does it bother me that no one seems to care about the loss to Northern Illinois? Yes, but they have better wins than Indiana, so I understand them being seated in front of Indiana. When I look at SMU and them being ranked in front of and seated in front of Indiana, SMU won the ACC. They didn't lose a conference game all year, even though their schedule wasn't really all that tough. And if they beat Clemson, which I think that they will, they're favored by 2.5 points the last time that I checked. So sorry, I lost my spot there. Anyway, if SMU beats Clemson, then they will clearly be deserving of being ranked in front of Indiana, because the win over Clemson is simply better than any win that Indiana has this year. Okay, so I don't think I have to justify Texas or Georgia or Ohio State or anyone else who's ranked in front of Indiana. The 10 seed is where Indiana belongs. And it's simply because of their schedule, which is something that has been talked about all year. The schedule for Indiana was both a blessing and a curse. Part of why they're in the college football playoff is because they beat 11 clearly inferior opponents. Okay? They played one close game all year. It was against Michigan. they won. Every other game was a blowout. They blew out bad teams consistently, and then the one great team, because that's what Ohio State is, even though they lost to Michigan, the one great team that they played blew them out. So, it's great that they blew teams out. The issue is the teams that they blew out weren't very good. And I'm very curious to know, and we never will, would Indiana be ranked higher if they hadn't canceled their non-conference game against Louisville and played Western Illinois instead? Like, if they had a good win over Louisville, would they be viewed differently? Because that'd be a better win than a lot of the other wins that they have on their schedule. It'd definitely be better than their win over Western Illinois. What if in conference, instead of Indiana playing a bunch of the bad teams, or even if they just swapped out Northwestern for Illinois or Iowa, and if they'd beaten one of those teams, would they be perceived differently? What if they had played Missouri or Florida out of conference and had beaten them? How differently would they be perceived by everyone? Because obviously, if you go out of conference and you beat like Georgia, then you have an immense amount of respect for your team. But if they'd beaten like a mid-tier SEC team, would we look at them differently? Would they be seated higher? I am intrigued this offseason and 4 and 5 years down the road, because that's how far out you schedule these non-conference games. I'm interested to see how teams schedule their non-conference games season after season, because Indiana is an excellent example of a team to look at for both the pros and cons of not having a tough non-conference, right? Because of how big these conferences are now, every single team is going to have a year like Indiana at some point where they mainly play the bad teams in their conference. Indiana played 9 conference games this year. 7 of their 9 conference games came against the teams that finished in the bottom half of the Big Ten. Okay, the other 2 conference games that they played were against Michigan, who finished 7 and 5, and Ohio State, who we all know is great, even though they lost to Michigan in the final week of the season. Some teams, some programs are going to look at what happened to Indiana this year and schedule a soft non-conference schedule. Because if they can just consistently beat the bad teams on their schedule, they'll be in. And if they get crushed, like let's say, let's take I don't know, let me think. Let's take Vanderbilt in the SEC. Okay? Not saying Indiana's Vanderbilt, they're just the first team that came to mind. If Vanderbilt caught a lucky draw and they went 11-1 and they got blown out by Georgia and their one loss, they would have precedent to be in, because that's pretty much what happened to Indiana this year. They got a lucky draw. They go 11-1. They get crushed by Ohio State, and they're still going to get in. So I think we're going to see is some of these lesser programs in the Power 4 conferences. Okay, talking about teams like Purdue, Syracuse, Arkansas. I'll self-deprecate there a little bit. Arizona, UCF, Utah. Maybe not Utah. Let's go more like Houston. I think we're going to see teams like that don't have a ton of history. I think we're going to see them schedule lesser opponents in the non-conference in hopes that they can get a lucky draw one year and wind up like Indiana. Meanwhile, other schools, probably the better ones like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, so on, will look at the Indiana schedule and they'll play a tougher non-conference schedule. Okay, because let's just be honest. Like, if Indiana had a good non-conference win, if they'd gone on the road and beaten Missouri or someone like that, they would, I think, that they would then have ground to stand on, or a better ground to stand on, in terms of hosting a home college football playoff game. Okay? And they didn't have that game on their schedule this year. Like, that wasn't even an opportunity afforded to them. And so I'm very interested to see how they schedule going forward and how other teams across the country schedule as well, because Indiana's schedule wasn't the only thing that made an impact on how teams were ranked last night. Okay? Either way, tough schedule or not, Indiana is still in the college football playoff as likely the 10 seed. Okay? They aren't the only team, though, that learned their fate last night. Ohio State learned that they're going to host a home playoff game, even though that loss to Michigan probably should have costed them more than what it did. Ohio State dropping only 4 spots after losing at home to 7-5 Michigan and only scoring 10 points doesn't make sense when you look at Miami, who lost on the road to 9-3 Syracuse, they dropped 6 spots. Like, that doesn't make sense. So Ohio State probably should have been penalized a little bit more than what they were, but either way, the committee is going to allow them to host a home playoff game in Columbus. And then you have another team, or a couple other teams, that learned their fates last night. Alabama learned that they have a chance to be in the college football playoff, which made everybody upset. But let's be honest, it wouldn't have mattered what the committee did. Someone was going to walk away last night upset, okay? And whatever didn't make sense last night was going to be pointed out, like Ohio State falling 4 spots for a much worse loss at home than Miami falling 6 spots for a better loss on the road against Syracuse. Here's the truth about the College Football Playoff Committee. The College Football Playoff Committee are like your parents, or they're like parents with multiple high schoolers. I'm thinking about my childhood here. I have 3 siblings. We're all very close in age. And yeah, so when I was in high school, my parents just kind of did what they wanted, okay? Because it didn't matter what they did, what movie we all decided to go to see, where we decided to go on vacation, what we were having for dinner that night, whatever. It didn't matter what they chose. One of me or one of my siblings was not going to be happy with the result because there were 4 of us. When you're making a decision for 6 people, like, someone is not going to be happy about the outcome. And the college football playoff works the exact same way. They're picking 12 teams, and there's probably 3 or 4 teams on the outside looking in. Ole Miss, Miami, are the best examples. Like, they have a case to be in. And whether they'd opted for Miami, Ole Miss, or Alabama, whichever 2 got left out, we're going to be upset no matter what happened. And we see this every single year with the College Football Playoff Committee, right? They do what they want. People don't like it. People complain about it. But the College Football Playoff Committee usually gets it right. They do. Okay, everyone was upset last year. How can you put one-loss Alabama in the SEC champion? How can you put them in over undefeated Florida State? Everyone was outraged. Not everyone. Alabama fans were quite happy. I was happy as well because I didn't think that Florida State without Jordan Travis deserved to be in, but that's beside the point. And then, we watch Alabama play a competitive first-round game, and we go watch Florida State get beat like 63-0 or whatever the score was against Georgia. And it was like, oh, the playoff committee got that right. For this year, I think South Carolina should have been selected over Alabama. But I get it. Alabama beat them in the head-to-head. Miami falling further in the rankings than Ohio State did, despite having the same amount of losses and losing to a better team on the road, doesn't make sense. It doesn't. But if we look at this, if we look at the full picture of things, I think it makes sense for Ohio State to host a home playoff game because they're one of the 8 best teams in the country. I think it makes sense for Miami to not be in the college football playoff because they aren't one of the 12 best teams. They don't have any ranked wins on the season. And the fact that they lost to their 2 best opponents that they played all year, Miami, I think it further proves that they don't belong. So yes, we cannot like the different things that the playoff committee did, but they do make sense. Okay, for Alabama last night, because I think this is really the thing that upset a lot of people. Alabama learned that they will be in the college football playoff unless Clemson beats SMU, because then Clemson jumps in as an automatic qualifier. SMU likely stays in because, according to the committee, they said that conference championship games don't matter. We'll see. I kind of find that hard to believe because, as I just alluded to, they just do whatever they want. But when it comes to Alabama, it makes sense that they're in. Okay, they did not get in over Miami, Ole Miss, and South Carolina because they're Alabama. That's just not true. Everyone knows that Nick Saban isn't there anymore. Everyone knows that as good of a coach as Kalen DeBoer is, he's not Nick Saban. Everyone knows that Alabama is not the same team that they've been in years prior. And let's not act like Miami isn't a huge brand. Let's not act like they aren't the U. Let's not act like Ed Reed and Ray Lewis and Jimmy Johnson and Devin Hester and several other great football players came out of that program. That is a program with a lot of history and is undoubtedly a big brand. Okay, and when it comes to Ole Miss, let's not act like Lane Kiffin is not one of the most polarizing figures in the sport because he is. Alabama was put in over South Carolina because they beat them head to head. That makes sense. And Alabama was put in over Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss and Miami because Ole Miss and Miami simply aren't as deserving as Alabama is. Alabama has a better resume than both of them. Miami has 2 losses. One to 9-3 Syracuse, who's ranked 22nd, and one to Georgia Tech, who went 7-5. When you look at Miami's schedule, those are the 2 best teams they have played all year, and they lost both of them. All of their other wins aren't good. Their best win's Louisville. It's not that great. And then you throw in the fact that they have one of the worst defenses, of all the teams in the Power 4 conference. They do not deserve a chance to compete for a national title. Now, look, I get it. They have Cam Ward, a guy who's going to be in New York for, as a Heisman finalist. He's amazing, right? Could potentially be the first quarterback taken. That defense, though, and the soft schedule that they played this year cost them a spot in the college football playoff. Alabama didn't get selected over them because their name's Alabama. Alabama was selected over Miami and Ole Miss because they have wins over Georgia, South Carolina, LSU, and Missouri. Alabama's 4th best win was over LSU. Alabama's 4th best win over an 8-4 LSU team is better than Miami's best win over Louisville. Come on now. Alabama was clearly the team that should have been selected there over Miami. Alabama, they are tied with Georgia and Oregon for the most wins over teams that finished ranked in the top 25 with 3. You know how many Miami has? 0. You know how many Ole Miss has? 2. The lack of a signature win from Miami is why they were left out, and Alabama was put in. Alabama played a tougher schedule than Ole Miss did. Okay, they went on the road to Wisconsin in the non-conference as well, even though they winded up not being that great. The reason why Alabama was put in over Ole Miss is because they played a tougher schedule. It's really that simple. Alabama deserves to be in, just like Indiana does. And as I was alluding to earlier with Indiana and the schedule and how our team's going to go about scheduling the non-conference, we just saw the inverse of Indiana with Miami. They played a soft schedule and were left out because they don't have a signature win. Look, if Miami had one great win or just one really good win, they would have been put in. Okay, but they didn't draw SMU or Clemson in the ACC this year. Not their fault, but that's the reality. If they'd gone out of conference and beaten Missouri, they'd gone out of conference and beaten Illinois, somebody like that, then I think that they would have been put in over Alabama. The issue is they didn't have a win that the playoff committee could point to and be like, that is how I know that they're one of the 12 best teams in the country. So going to be interesting to see how teams kind of build their schedules going forward. I know I'm absolutely fascinated by it. Also fascinated to hear Kevin Potts' thoughts coming up at 11 o'clock. He's going to join me. We're going to talk a little bit of college football playoff. We're going to talk some NFL stuff as well. He was at the 49ers and Buffalo Bills game on Sunday night, and I'm just very curious about his experience, what it's like going to a game in Buffalo. Bills fans are crazy. It was freezing cold. There's like a foot of snow. Very excited to hear about his experience doing that, but we're also going to obviously talk a little bit of college football playoff and things of that nature as well. But when we come back here in about 4 minutes, I got a lot to get to. Pacers, they lose again. Pacers lost again. They went on the road to Toronto. They lost 122-111. They play again tonight. It's back-to-back. They're on the road at Brooklyn. Like they've got to figure some things out, and I've got some thoughts on the Pacers' struggles this season, and I'm going to give you those thoughts when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
Unadulterated sports talk with unfiltered takes. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? The real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. Kevin Potts joining me here in about 35 minutes. Talk a little NFL, a little college football playoff. Should be a blast. It's always fun when Kevin comes on. But it's Wednesday. I usually talk Pacers on Wednesdays. Just a nice, easy time to do it. That and college football playoff usually dominates the shows on Wednesdays. And sadly, I've had to speak negatively about the Indiana Pacers, who continue to struggle after losing on the road last night to one of the worst teams in the NBA, the Toronto Raptors, 122-111. They're now 9-13 on the year. It's not very good. And last night, they just dug too big of a hole for themselves. They were down by 24 at one point, and they had to work their way back from that. And look, I watch a lot of NBA, stayed up late last night to watch the Nuggets and the Warriors, and watched a bit of Spurs Suns as well. It was a blast. I had a lot of fun. And I know through watching that the three-point shooting in the NBA allows for no lead to be safe. Okay? But 24 points is still a lot, especially when you defend as badly as the Indiana Pacers do. They are 25th in the NBA in defensive rating. Okay, when you defend that badly, it is incredibly difficult to climb out of a 24-point hole. Just is. And, as I watch the Pacers, the more and more I realize that teams love playing against them. I mean, seriously, like the Pacers are just like, do you want to score your career high tonight? And then everyone's like, yeah, that sounds great. And then Scotty Barnes goes for his career high last night with 35. And then Paulo Banchero earlier in the year was like, let me go get 50 really quickly. The defense from the Pacers is awful. And that is their biggest issue. And defense in the NBA is just effort. It's an effort thing, playing defense in the NBA, because you're playing against these awesome offensive players. And look, like, I don't care how good of a defender you are, like you aren't going to stop a lot of these guys. Okay? But if you play with effort like the Orlando Magic do, then you can disrupt guys, you can contest shots. And when you look at the Pacers, they don't do that. They aren't playing hard enough. And at least that's what Tyrese Halliburton had to say after the game. He was very, very frustrated. I've got a couple clips from him, but here he is after the game talking about how the product on the floor needs to be better.
Just playing harder. I think the product we're putting on the floor right now as a group is embarrassing. And I think we answered the conversation we had at halftime. I think we answered that in the second half better, but it's got to be like that for 48 minutes. Every team is playing hard right now. Every team is young and has energy, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be matching that and beyond. So, I just think the product that we're putting out there on a nightly basis right now needs to be better, because we work too hard. Too many people care. You got too much pride in it. So, the product has to be better, and I think just the effort has to be better. And if it's not, then he's going to keep playing around with lineups, playing around with different guys to figure out what's going to put the best product on the floor.
Tyrese Halliburton, Pacers point guard, right there, talking about the lack of effort and how the product on the floor isn't good enough. And Halliburton's right. The defense being 25th in the NBA isn't great. The offense has struggled mightily, right? Look, we all watched the Pacers play last year. You know how they won games. They just outscored everybody. They did. And part of why they're losing games this year is they just aren't as good offensively. And there's multiple reasons for that. Part of that has been the struggles from Tyrese Halliburton. Part of that has been not having Aaron Nesmith to provide much needed shooting. Part of that has been not having Andrew Nembhard to kind of be a secondary ball handler, a guy who's capable of running the offense when Tyrese Halliburton's on the bench. So, like, there are issues there on the offensive side of the ball as well. I don't think it's just the defense from the Pacers, even though that is, once again, the main issue that they have. And speaking of Halliburton, he's defended better this year, definitely more engaged. And if you want a positive spin on last night's game, he finally played well on the road, 30 points, 10 of 16 shooting. So at least that went low, but they lost. And that's what matters. And Tyrese Halliburton, like I said, had a lot to say after the game. Here he is a little bit more talking about just the lack of effort from the Pacers this season.
I think that needs to be a reality check right now, individually and collectively. Guys need to look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves what they can do better. And it starts with me. I have to be a better leader. I got to do everything better and harder because I'm not ready to piss away a year of my career or this organization or this team's season. So everybody's got to come together collectively, figure out what we can do better. It's part of the growing pains. I mean, listen, we're 9-13 right now. We can act like the world is falling apart, and that's not the case. But there also needs to be a sense of urgency, and everybody can keep saying, oh, it's 4 games, we'll be back to 500. It ain't that easy, guys. Like I said, it's a reality check individually and collectively because we have to put a better product on the floor. I think as a group in the game of basketball, you have to control what you can. You cannot control if you make every shot. You can't control substitution patterns. You can't control stuff like that, but you can control how hard you're going to play. You can control your energy and your spirit. Those are all controllable things. So, like I said, everybody's got to do a little bit of a gut check themselves in the mirror, and figure out what we can do better. We play a Brooklyn team tomorrow that plays hard as ever. Hard as this team. But every game, we keep saying, well, this team plays hard. This team plays. It's the NBA. Everybody plays hard. Everybody wants something bigger. And we should be a part of that. We want more than what we have right now. So, like I said, collectively, we got to be better. But I do think the main thing is effort, and our spirit's got to be right. And, how can we get better on a night-to-night basis?
Tyrese Halliburton right there talking furthermore about the lack of efforts from the Pacers that we've seen over these past few games. And, oh, man, it's really simple for the Pacers. It really is. They have a plethora of offensive talent. They like Siakam, Mathurin. I know a lot of people don't like Miles Turner, but he's playing really well this year on the offensive side of the ball. Tyrese Halliburton, 3rd team All-NBA last year. Andrew Nembhard really popped during the playoffs. Like, they have more than enough offense. Okay, I'm not worried about the offense, even though it hasn't been great to start the year. Once Halliburton gets going, or if he continues to stay going, then the offense will be fine. The issue is on defense. And more importantly, the lack of effort that they've played with. You can see it with your eyes. Okay, the NBA is allowing defenses to be more physical this year. Maybe that's part of why the Pacers have struggled offensively. I don't know. But when I watch the Pacers play defense, and I watch them just allow guys to blow by them with no physical resistance, no little hand check, no bump, nothing, it shows a lack of effort. And the numbers show it as well. They are 25th in defensive rating this year through 22 games. There is a lack of effort because when I look back at last year and I look at their defensive rating after the All-Star break, a 21-game stretch to end the season, over that 21-game stretch, they were 11th in defensive rating with a very similar roster to what they have right now. Pacers have played 22 games this year, and they're 26th. Where, the last, to end last year, final 21-game stretch, they were 11th. That tells me that they aren't defending with the same intensity as they were at the end of last year. And that's just not okay. And, you have to raise the question, what's different between now and then? Okay, the Pacers last year, at the end of the year after the All-Star break, they were competing for a top 6 seed at that time in the Eastern Conference. They aren't doing that right now because it's still somewhat early, right? We still have, 60 games left to be played. They also hadn't done anything before last year. There was still the drive and a desire to make the playoffs and to win playoff games and do all those things. And maybe this team, not just Tyrese Halliburton, but this team as a whole, isn't handling the success very well. Maybe they think that since they made an Eastern Conference Finals run, more so due to the injuries of other teams, that they can just kind of turn it on and turn it off whenever they want. and that they'll be fine. But that clearly isn't the case because they're 9-13. Hopefully, they realize they can't just flip it on and off, and that they aren't good enough to do that. Maybe they'll start playing harder because they have to figure things out. They do, and thankfully, they have 60 games left to do it. And yeah, I hope that they get it turned around because I do think this team's good. I do think that this team has the talent to go and win games. They definitely do. But we just aren't seeing the effort on the defensive end of the floor required to go out and do that. Kevin Potts still set to join me here at 11 o'clock. Can't wait to have him on. He'll be great as always to talk college football playoff rankings. We're going to talk some NFL stuff as well. And I also have to tell you about a meeting that I had last night. I had a shareholders meeting where we had some interesting conversation. I'm going to share those insights with you when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
More winners, more often. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? The real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. We're like 2.5 weeks away from Christmas. 3 weeks away, right? That sounds right. I don't know. I'm just along for the ride. I'm just going to do what my wife tells me to do when it comes to all of this Christmas stuff. Anyway, oh, man. So I just got done talking about the Pacers, and I've been watching them a lot this year because I bought some stock, and I had to have a shareholders meeting last night because the stock is not going up. It just feels like it continues to go down. So last night I had to call some of my buddies, and I was like, hey, guys, we have to talk about the stock that we hold in Jarace Walker. Right, Jarace Walker, number 8 overall pick a couple of years ago by the Indiana Pacers. Last year was his rookie season. This is year 2. He didn't play a ton last year, and he's playing this year a lot more than he was last year. Part of that having to do with injuries, and things aren't going well. So I would like to call an official on the air Jarace Walker shareholder meeting.
One thing I can promise you, even in this market, is that I never ask my clients to judge me on my winners. I ask them to judge me on my losers because I have so few. And in the case of Airtime, based on every technical factor out there, John, we are looking at a grand slam home run.
That's what I thought. Jarace Walker was grand slam home run, 6'7", 7'2" wingspan, athletic, can jump out of the building, has some ball handling ability. Was really excited. The issue is that when I bought all of this Jarace Walker stock, I was like, this dude's going to be an awesome defender at a minimum. And, almost everybody's jump shot improves the longer that they're in, or as they develop throughout their NBA career. So I was like, he'll turn into a good shooter. The issue is he hasn't developed into the defender I thought he would be yet. We are 22 games into this season. Last year, his rookie year, he played in 32 games for the Pacers. So he's played in 54 games so far throughout his very short career at an average of about 10 minutes per game. And I have to raise the question, do I need to sell my Jarace Walker stock before it's worth nothing? Do I need, or should I wait? Should I hold on to it? Usually I don't have to worry about this in the NBA. In the NFL, when it comes to players, I have a 16-game rule for quarterbacks, okay? Because that's about the length of a regular season, right? Like, I just want to see a full season's worth of starts before I decide whether or not I want to keep or sell my stock. The issue with the NBA is usually I'm right about NBA prospects. I don't want to brag, but I tend to be. And because I think evaluating NBA players is way easier than NFL players. Because let's just be honest, like when you look at the NBA, it's full of tall, long guys who can shoot. And usually if you're those 3 things, then you find some sort of success. Anyway, so because I'm usually right about NBA guys, I've never had to create a rule for myself on when to officially give up on or sell the stock of a young NBA player. And where I sit right now, I'm leading towards 82 games. Because that's a full season. It's like I want to see 82 games worth from a player before I decide to sell or buy more stock. And, but there's a part of me, though, as well. It's like maybe it should be longer. Maybe it should be 100 games. That's a year and a half. Maybe it should be 2 seasons because, in the NFL, guys are drafted at 22, usually, not always. But around that age, right? They're older. Whereas the NBA, guys are drafted at 19. So because of that, it's like, should I give them longer before I give up on them? And looking at someone like Evan Mobley, who I loved coming out of USC, drafted by the Cavs, first 2 years, underwhelming. This year could be a career year, playing a major, major role in what the Cleveland Cavaliers are doing this year. But so that's more reason to hold on to stock a little bit longer in the NBA. Either way, I have to decide what I'm going to do about Jarace Walker. Because I have to be honest, like I still like the dude. I still like the tools. I still like what he brings to the table. Like, he's still incredibly athletic. He's still 6'8". He's still incredibly long with that 7'2" wingspan. Like, he checks all of those boxes. He was a spotty shooter in college. Okay. Like, he was a guy who wanted to get downhill, get to the rim, and then just out athletic everybody on the floor and finish. Right. And that works really well for him in college. That's why he was the number 8 overall pick. And then the question is, like, can he figure out how to shoot the ball? He's a 40% 3-point shooter for his career right now. He's at 39% on the year on 2.5 attempts per game, which isn't a ton of attempts, but he's only playing like 17 minutes a night. So, it's not like he's, playing 40 minutes and he's having opportunities to get up more. I think 2.5 attempts per game in a 17-minute span is pretty solid. And then when you look at his shot chart and you look at where he's shooting the ball well, where do you have to shoot the ball well if you're going to be a role player in the NBA? Because that's what I thought Jarace Walker would be coming out of Houston. He'd be this elite 3-and-D guy. And he's shooting above league average in the corners from those corner 3 spots. He's shooting 58% from 3 in the right corner, and he's shooting 44% from 3 in the left corner. So the dude can shoot the ball well, it seems, so far through his early career. And then, so like, there's a large part of me that's like, that's a great thing. That's a great sign. That right there should be enough for me to be like, yeah, I'm going to hold on to all my stock. I'm not going to sell any of it quite yet. And then you look at the defense, which is really why I was high on Jarace Walker coming out of Houston. The guy looked like someone who would just be this awesome defender at some point. And he's been a better defender this year than he was last year. He's averaging 1.5 steals per game. That's in the 90th percentile of the NBA. His per 36 numbers have him at 2.5 steals a game, which is in the 94th percentile. Like, he plays the passing lanes really well. Like, there's a lot that I still like about him. And then speaking of passing lanes, he's an excellent passer. I don't think he has the ball enough to show off that skill, but Rick Carlisle has complimented him on his passing and his vision. So there's a lot to like, and he's only 20. The dude can't buy a drink yet. And so it's hard because just take last night. He was terrible last night. I mean, no good at all. 0 points, didn't make a shot. It just is ugly. It was not it was not a great performance from him last night, and it feels like night after night we just continue to stack up these lackluster performances. Like last night, he played 26 minutes. He was 0 of 5 from the field, 0 of 1 from 3, had 2 rebounds, had 2 assists, but he turned it over 3 times. It's like, I don't know. Like, that's not good. But the reason why he was out there was because he played with effort. It felt like Carlisle did that thing where he was like, you know what? These starters aren't playing very hard, so let's throw guys out there who do play hard. And Jarace Walker checks that box. And so it's tough to figure out what to do, because I also think that playing defense in the NBA is really hard, especially for young players. It's pretty normal for young teams in the NBA to struggle because they just don't play defense well enough. Okay, because look, everyone in the NBA can score. Okay, like the list of guys that if you gave them 17 shots a night, that would average 20 points. Like, that list is incredibly long. Okay, so like there's plenty of guys in the NBA who can go out and score. The question is, can you play defense? And Jarace Walker just hasn't gotten to that point yet. It's still really early in the year, so like I am going to hold my stock for now. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Pacers traded him at some point. And I think if that happens, he has a real chance to blossom into a really good player. Like, there's a real world where the Pacers are just a bad fit for him because he doesn't get the ball enough, since he's playing alongside Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton and Benedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard and Miles Turner. Like, that's 5 guys. 5 guys right off the rip who are higher priorities than him on the offensive end of the floor. With the way that Obi Toppin has played this year, he's been awesome. He's a higher priority than Jarace Walker is on offense. TJ McConnell is a higher priority than Jarace Walker is on offense. I mean, there's just so many guys in front of him that I just don't think we're getting to see everything that he brings to the table. And that is an issue. And the Pacers need him to really start playing well because they're in the middle of an easier stretch of their season, right? They played Toronto last night. They're going to Brooklyn tonight. This is a game that they should and need to win because they've now lost 3 in a row, one against Detroit, one against Memphis, and then last night against Toronto, tonight on the road at Brooklyn, and then Friday they're on the road at Chicago. But listen to this upcoming stretch of games for the Pacers. They're at Brooklyn tonight, at Chicago, Charlotte at home, at Philadelphia, New Orleans at home. Those are 5 games that the Pacers should win. They should go 4-1 in that stretch. And it's going to be incredibly important for them to do that because after those 5 games, their schedule becomes incredibly tough. They're at Phoenix. Phoenix is good this year. They're at Sacramento, who's not as good this year. That's a game that they should win. And then they get Oklahoma City at home on Thursday, the day after Christmas. And then they go to Boston twice. Those are their next 5 games. Like that is a brutal stretch because Phoenix, Phoenix, Golden State, Oklahoma City, and Boston twice, and then Milwaukee. Like that's 5 really tough opponents after they get done with this lighter stretch. And so they need to show up and they need to perform well during this stretch. Okay. And then when it comes to the Colts who are off this week, bye week, it's important for them. Like this bye week for the Colts is important. I hate that their bye week is in week 14. I think that it would have been a little more advantageous for them if it had been week 7, week 8, somewhere closer to the middle of the season because they have to play for 13 straight weeks without any rest. Like injuries and things pile up. I think that when we look at the Colts and we look at this bye week, there are things that need to be fixed, right? Like, I was talking to Zach Hicks yesterday about all of their issues. And he's like, if the Colts can come out of this bye week knowing how to tackle, that'd be great. And I completely agree with that. The thing, though, is they have to come out of this healthy. Like, the offensive line played well against the Patriots on Sunday, but I think part of that's because the Patriots' offensive line's bad. The Broncos, that's not the case. The Broncos get after the quarterback really well. It's one of the best defenses in the NFL. And so, like, the most important thing for the Colts is just to get out of this bye week healthy. Like, Josh Downs needs to come back because this Broncos defense is elite, and they need to win this game if they want to make the playoffs. They're going to need a lot of help from the Broncos if they lose. So they need Josh Downs back. They need for Braden Smith, the normal starting right tackle, even though I think Matt Gonsalves has come in. He's done an adequate job, not a great job, but he's been good enough. But like they need Braden Smith. They need Ryan Kelly. Like they need their normal starting offensive line desperately because Anthony Richardson's awesome. His ability to avoid sacks, I think, has been the most impressive thing that we've seen him do this year. And that's not going to get a bunch of publicity, right? The 60-yard passes down the field or what get the publicity, but the ability to avoid negative plays and to turn what could be a 5-yard loss into like a 3-yard gain is important. And, we've seen him do that repeatedly. And when Anthony Richardson has opportunities to just sit in the pocket and not have to worry about evading rushers, he's been really good this year. Like I go back to that game against the Lions, of which he was 9 of 14 on the pass attempts that he had when he had a normal pocket and there wasn't pressure in his face. When he has a clean pocket, when he has time to throw, he can throw the ball on time and on target most of the time, not all the time. And the best way to make that happen is to not have a right guard playing that you signed to the practice squad 2 weeks ago, like they had on Sunday. And so when I look at the Colts and I look at Richardson in this offense in this bye week, Josh Downs needs to get healthy. Hopefully Ryan Kelly's back. Hopefully Braden Smith is back. And they're not just like 80% lumbering around out there. Hopefully they're like 90% healthy because no one's 100% at this point in the year. So let's get Josh Downs back. Let's get healthy on the offensive line. And let's hope that this defense learns to tackle. Like if those things happen, the offense gets healthy and the defense can start tackling, the Colts can beat the Broncos. They can. And, that game's 2 weeks away. I wish it was this Sunday. I hate that the Colts aren't playing. Sundays are just better when the Colts are on. It gives me a little something extra to do, So, but they're not. They're on a bye week, which is much, much needed. I'm going to talk to Kevin Potts when we come back here at 11 o'clock. We're going to get into college football playoff rankings. He was at Bills 49ers. Very interested to hear his experience on that. We're going to do some general NFL topics, and then we're going to talk Anthony Richardson. We're going to talk Colts Broncos. We're going to talk draft stuff because that's really what Kevin's awesome at is doing draft stuff. So we're going to get into all that stuff for the Colts when we come back here in about 5 minutes or so.
Getting quality employees to fill positions in your company is essential, but finding those people can be a major hassle unless you use ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter makes finding quality people a breeze. ZipRecruiter's advanced technology identifies candidates with the right skills, sends you great matches, then you can easily invite them to apply. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. See for yourself. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/free to try ZipRecruiter for free. That's ZipRecruiter.com/free.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something that's wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. Joining me now is Kevin Potts, writer of the Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdown Substack. He has a YouTube channel as well. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinPotts06. Kevin, what's going on, man?
I'm good. You know, we're starting to get really deep into these football seasons. All these games are starting to matter, and it's been a lot of fun to watch over the past couple of weeks.
It really has. I know you enjoy college football as well, so I definitely want to talk about the rankings that came out last night. Some people are happy. A lot of people are very upset, which is normal. But do you appreciate, or do you like or dislike how signing day is, you know, a few days after the last week of the regular season?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of how they do both that and the transfer portal right now. I really wish we had a little bit more of a time for things to settle from the games happening to moving forward.
Kevin, you there?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, there you are.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think signing day and just transfer portal dates in general probably should be pushed back a little bit. It feels a little bit weird that for some of these teams we are discussing where they're going into a playoff atmosphere, and for other teams we are discussing who is joining and leaving the team. I think it's part of the general craziness of kind of college football landscape right now, and maybe the schedule being that being pushed back a little bit might actually help some of the things going on in college football.
Are you a Washington fan?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if you follow. So I am a huge Arkansas fan. We're terrible. Terrible is probably a bit harsh, but anyway, whenever I refresh my Twitter feed today and I see Arkansas signing these like 3-star guys, I just feel inspired to go and like found like a Fortune 500 company and just go spend all of my earnings on the NIL stuff to help my football team win games. Do you get that urge when you see who Washington is signing?
Oh yeah, I mean it's exciting when you see guys come in, and now that there is kind of a idea that maybe you could help even if you don't have the money to do so, you definitely feel that way. It's like Washington has a beer that they sell at games that goes directly to NIL. So when you buy one of those, like, well, I'm helping the team get better. I'm doing my part. So I definitely do feel that same thing where I want to go help and bring these guys in, because in this new landscape that we got, money really defines it, and it's very public now.
It does, and it is very public, and some people think it's good. I don't know how I feel about it. Part of me thinks it's great. Other part of me is like, I don't know about all this. But once again, joined by Kevin Potts, writer of the Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdowns Substack. I do know that I liked the rankings last night. A lot of people didn't. What were your thoughts?
My first and primary thought is, if you are a fan of a team that's 2 or 3 losses, that's right on that bubble, whether you're in or out, I don't really want to hear you complain. You have had a lot of chances to make it not a decision for the committee, whether you're Miami, you're Alabama, you're Ole Miss, and you have lost some of those opportunities, and you have put it in the hands of the committee. This isn't a Florida State situation where you literally won all your games and then you get left out. In an expanded playoff, if you are a good, not great team that can't get in, it's probably time to look inward. As far as the actual rankings, I think the biggest discrepancy people had was Bama versus Miami. I was personally fine with it. I think we have seen Miami struggle for a lot of the year with not so great teams, and it has finally come to catch up with them. And they just don't really have that quality win to keep them in the field. And while Bama's not perfect either, they've obviously had some bad losses. That really good win that they have on their resume seems like it was enough to keep them in. I'm fine with that approach. My only question to see what's coming is, if SMU does lose to Clemson, do they drop behind Bama? I'm not a huge fan of punishing the teams in the conference finals for losing that extra game against a very good team. And I just think SMU is a better resume than their ACC counterpart in Miami. So I'd be curious to see how that happens, but I'm not going to get mad about a hypothetical until we see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think when things happen, people just react, which is fine because it's college football rankings. Like, are they important? Yes, but are they the end of the world? No. But for me, like I went back and I looked at the schedules. Miami, the two best teams that Miami played this year were Georgia Tech and Syracuse, and they lost both of them. And then you throw in the fact that Alabama's fourth best win against LSU would be Miami's best win. I just think that when you look at the wins, I don't think there's really a conversation really even to be had.
Yeah, and I think if you're a team like Miami that doesn't have a lot of great wins, you kind of have to rely on the really good record thing. Take Indiana, for example. Obviously, they don't have a ton of amazing wins, but they just have that one loss against a very good Ohio State team. So letting them in because they did their job very successfully for a large part of the season, I think is fine. When you're a team like Miami, where you, like you said, you don't have that quality win, you've now stacked 2 losses. And even when you did beat bad teams, it wasn't always the most dominant approach. It's just really tough for me to hear the argument why they should be in, even though I really would love, as a draft analyst, to see Cam Ward get to play some of these playoff games against some of these really good defenses.
Yeah, that's feels like we're missing something there because I'm with you. I was excited to watch Cam Ward do that, and then they lost to Syracuse, and that was that. I think the last thing here on the college football playoff, and then we can move to the NFL stuff. How do you think, because this has been kind of my question all year. You have a team like Indiana who goes 11-1. They're in the playoff. They only played one good team. They got blown out, but because they beat 11 bad teams, they're in. And so I think there's an argument of don't play anyone good, and you can probably make the playoff. But then you have a team like Miami, whose record's still good at 10-2. And if they were 10-2 with like a good non-conference win, then they would, I think, that they would be in over Alabama. How do you think teams are going to schedule kind of their non-conference games going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult. Like I said, there's a bunch of different reasons to do different things. I think the bigger blue blood programs can probably get away with a little bit more. I think if you're a team like in Indiana, you have to be pretty much perfect. So maybe keeping that schedule a little bit easier so you don't give committee the opportunity to take you out. There's obviously always the joke that Bama always finds its way in because, well, you're Alabama. We're probably going to give you the benefit of the doubt and the tiebreaker. I think the biggest thing is these conference schedules need to get better. You can't really control how these teams do non-conference, but like Indiana just skipping half of the top teams at the top of the Big Ten creates just these weird discussions. And I think that we need to do a better job with scheduling these. It's tough with how big these conferences are, where more teams are playing the entirety of their conference or as much as possible. So we don't have these lopsided schedules. But I don't know how we get there because college football and the new conferences is kind of the Wild West right now.
Yeah, you're right. It is Wild West. And I love what you said there about Indiana. Indiana played 7 of the bottom 9 teams in the Big Ten. Which like, look, it's partially not their fault. Like, you know, Washington was the runner-up last year. Michigan won the national title. It's not Indiana's fault that those teams were bad this year, but that's kind of what happened, and that's what I think we should have to base things off of, what actually happened. So it was interesting. Once again, joined by Kevin Potts, writer of the Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdown Substack. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin Potts06. So, Kevin, you got to do something awesome on Sunday night, something that I want to do. You got to go to a Bills game, Bills 49ers. I first have to ask, did you suffer any broken bones from jumping through tables? Because I feel like if you go to a game in Buffalo, that's something that you just have to do.
Thankfully, most of the table jumping I just viewed from afar, did not personally engage. So maybe a couple bruises from slipping in the snow and some ice, but altogether, body is in one piece post Bills tailgate.
That's good. Was it? So look, I live in Indiana, so what I'm about to say doesn't make sense, but I hate the snow. I hate cold weather. It's the worst. Was it miserable watching the game in that much snow with it being that cold?
No, it's one of the best sporting experiences I've ever seen in my life. And maybe part of it is because I knew it was going to possibly snow coming in. You book this trip to Buffalo, you kind of expect a December game to be freezing and windy and potentially snowy. So you're readily mentally going in. But it really added to the atmosphere The tailgates were awesome. Bills fans are some of the friendliest people I've ever met. They brought me and my buddies in and treated us like we're friends. It was a ton of fun going into that older stadium, having to shovel the snow. It was basically like a 3-hour-long party. Independent of my team not playing very well, it was a lot of fun just to be in that environment, in that city with the snow coming down. And, well, yes, it was a little cold, and I do have a lot of respect for those Bills fans that go do that week after week, year in, year out in the winter. It was worth bearing for a little bit for that experience.
Okay. The fact that you called it one of the best sporting events you've ever been to, and like you said, your team lost, that speaks volumes. Is there anything that you noticed? Look, like obviously the Bills have a lot of really good players. 49ers are struggling this year. They have a lot of good players. But I know for me, whenever I go to games live, I feel like I pick up on something just a little extra that I miss on TV. Was there anything about Josh Allen or McCaffrey or Purdy or Deebo Samuel or anyone that you noticed in person that you usually don't see when you're watching on TV?
I think Josh Allen specifically, it's that energy he kind of brings in that stadium, the delusional confidence that him being so good gives the fans. Anytime the ball was in his hands, even though it's snowing and it's crazy, you kind of expect something good to happen. You feel it in the stadium, as opposed to the other side when the Niners had it. I think Brock is a good quarterback, but not on Josh Allen's level. There's a little bit more trepidation, especially in that weather, what's going to happen. And then just the Bills overall, this new version of the team they have that's a lot more physical, this downhill run game that's really gotten going. You felt their ability to control that entire game, particularly on the ground with those running backs and Josh Allen's legs. And it felt like a team with an identity versus the 49ers team. The other side that's been struggling really feels like they are trying to find who they are as a team right now. And you feel that difference a lot more, I think, in person than on the screen sometimes.
Joined by Kevin Potts, writer of the Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdowns. Substack, lives in Seattle, right? That area?
Yep.
But is a 49ers fan. So I have to ask, is the 49ers Super Bowl window closed?
I think for this current iteration of this team, probably. This has been a 49ers team that's been one of the best in football over the past 5 to 6 years. And it really seems like this was probably going to be the last year. And it's come up a little short. But obviously, the injury list is super long. I think everyone's probably seen all these guys get hurt. It's also been, I think, tough for fans of the NFL and Niners specifically to reconcile some of these players that were all pro levels, like Deebo Samuel and Kyle Juszczyk, maybe have taken a step back to more good/great players as opposed to the elite players they used to be. And it's starting to create and expose some of the cracks in the foundation of this team that have largely come when you miss on picks. Not having those 3 first-rounders from the Trey Lance trade is really starting to show up, especially in the trenches where you weren't able to replace the talent. And it's made this team need kind of an overhaul. Now, I don't think it's completely over with them. I think they can reopen this Super Bowl window. I still think they have a lot of talent, particularly at quarterback and skill position players. And the secondary has been really good. They have some young players there. But they might have a couple years of the 9 to 10 wins over the next couple of years as they retool, get younger, bring in some new talent, and try and reopen that Super Bowl window. But I don't think they're going to be that tier 1 49ers that we're used to. But I don't think they're going to bottom out. They're just going to be in that wild card hunt, I think, for the next couple of years until they can retool this roster.
Does paying Brock Purdy $60 million a year excite you or make you nervous?
It feels like a chore. It's like something you got to do because there's really no other option. You don't have a replacement plan. You have to keep this quarterback who is, I should say 10 to 15 range. Some people may think a little higher, but he is a good starting quality quarterback. Thankfully, the cap is exploding over the past few years. They had a good draft last year. They have a full allotment of picks this year. They have an owner who's willing to spend money to get creative with contracts. So I think you can make it work. And I think this front office and coaching staff has shown the ability to make adjustments and make the money work. So I don't think he's worth $60 million. If I lined up a little bit of money, I'm fine. You kind of have to in the NFL landscape.
You do. That's just the reality of it. And when it happens, some people will be very upset, and because that's what happens whenever any quarterback gets paid. Joined by Kevin Potts, writer of the Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdowns Substack. Speaking of the draft, the Rookie of the Year race is really interesting. Like on offense, I feel like there's three guys that kind of stick out, and then on defense, I don't feel like anyone's talking about it because the first defensive player wasn't selected until the 15th pick in this year's draft. Who are the kind of the rookies on both sides of the ball who have stuck out to you this year and could potentially win that award?
Yeah, well, I think offensive rookie of the year is everyone's going to talk about the quarterback, right? Dane Daniels had this historic start. He was awesome. Looked like the next second coming. Slowed down a little bit. I think the whole Commanders offense has come down to earth a little bit. The injuries are starting to pile up. I believe he's probably the betting favorite still. Bo Nix has come on really well over the past month. This whole Broncos team, I think, has really settled into themselves and has looked pretty good. But for me, it's going to be Brock Bowers. This is a tight end playing at an all-pro level. He'll probably be first or second team with George Kittle. He is on pace to break the rookie tight end receiving record. He's going to push Puka's rookie catch record. He's going to push the all-time tight end receiving record in a season. He is truly one of the best at the position. I unfortunately don't think he's going to win it because I think we all know how these awards work. They default towards quarterbacks. But Brock Bowers would be my pick on the offensive side of the ball. On defense, it's kind of a two-horse race. It's Jared Verse and Quinyon Mitchell. I think they're both fantastic. I would lean Verse. I think the counting stats are just a little bit too much. He's about 20 pressures higher than any other rookie, type of sacks and stops. He has been a menace for this Rams team that's really turned around the line. I think he'll probably win it. I think he should win it. But Quinyon Mitchell does deserve a lot of love for what he's done in that Eagles secondary. It's really turned it around this year.
He's been so good. I love Quinyon Mitchell. I loved him coming out of Toledo. He's who I wanted the Colts to take at 15. And, so I biasly, I would vote for Quinyon Mitchell. I also think that actually, no, that's probably not true. I'm not going to say that. But yeah, when it comes to Brock Bowers, I'm with you. I think I'd vote for him as well, just because I guess of the completeness of his season. Like he's been good from the jump, whereas like Bo Nix struggled to start. Jane Daniels is dropped off a bit, over these past few weeks. So I think just from a totality standpoint, I think I would vote for Bowers. And look, if you're breaking records, I think that you should vote for that guy. But like you said, we tend to skew these awards towards quarterbacks, which makes sense because quarterbacks more important and it's tougher to play and all those things. And speaking of quarterbacks, I know you've seen this. Anthony Richardson, 2 game-winning drives in the last 3 weeks. It's things here in Indianapolis are interesting because all the people who did not like him have just kind of gone silent. And then all the people who loved him are just overly obnoxious right now. What are kind of your thoughts on Richardson after seeing these 2 drives kind of take place?
I think he's looked really good. Now, has he been perfect? No. But I do think he looks a lot more like the prospect and the rookie quarterbacks that a lot of people fell in love with. The ability to create with his arms and his legs, push the ball down the field, avoid sacks. He's done a really good job despite being on a lot of pressure the past 3 weeks. The stat lines obviously don't look amazing, but it's one of those classic, you got to watch the games, man, because he's done a lot of really nice stuff that's not showing up in the stat sheet. There's been a lot of drops and pressure the past couple weeks. I think he's looked a lot more comfortable. I don't know what happened while he was benched, but he looks a lot more control. The fire's been awesome. I believe it was last week where he was yelling at the offense for not getting up on the line set quick enough. Just the little things that are fun to see from a young quarterback. I think Steichen's done a really good job of giving him a lot of easy answers, and it's made him look comfortable. It's obviously still a long way to go, but this 3-week sample size has a good reason to give a lot of Colts optimism. And I think he is one of a couple of the guys from that draft class who's had a really nice month or so that will probably extend them into next season and give them another shot the way they've been playing.
I completely agree with you. Joined by Kevin Potts, writer of the Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdown Substack. You can follow him on Twitter at KevinPotts06 to get updates on everything that he's doing. So I think that for Richardson, like it's obvious, not obvious, but it's pretty easy to figure out why he's finding success. He's, using his legs a little bit more. Shane Steichen's been running him a little bit more often. He's starting to hit some of, not all of, the layups as well. And so I think for him, it's pretty easy to identify why he's finding some success. Bryce Young, I'll be honest, I didn't watch much of him last year because the Panthers were so awful and he was so awful. What has happened for him to have this success over the last month?
He's weird. He's just better. He's just hitting the throws that he wasn't hitting last year. He looks a lot more like the Alabama Bryce Young that everyone had, or most people had, as QB1. There's not anything particularly different with the overall offense or some of the throws he's being asked to make. He just looks more comfortable. He's starting to hit them. I don't know if it's the coaching staff. I don't know if it's the presence of Andy Dalton. I don't know if it's just he's finally getting his feet underneath him. But it's been really awesome to see him become more comfortable. And it's very interesting to see how this Panthers team handles him going into next year, because it's still a small sample size of him playing well, but it's the best he's played well since Alabama outside of the Green Bay game last year. And I'm curious to see if he can sustain it or he's just having a little bit of stretch here.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's just I'm so glad for him. Like I don't think there's anyone in the NFL I want to succeed more than Bryce Young, because he's like, we talk about situations for quarterbacks that they get drafted into all the time. I don't think there's a worse one than what Bryce Young was drafted into there in Carolina. It's nice to see him playing well. It's nice to see Richardson kind of starting to figure things out. They've got a big game here in 2 weeks when they play the Broncos. Chances that they go on the road and win that game, how do the Broncos and Colts kind of match up?
I think the Broncos are probably the better team here. I think that defense is the best unit pretty much in any game they play. Obviously, they didn't look super great on Monday because they were missing a couple guys, but I think that's super talented on that unit. I think Sean Payton's got Bo Nix playing really well. I think this offense looks really well. I think they're probably going to beat that last seed in the AFC. The PFF put out like a probability chances and leverage for the AFC playoffs. And it basically says, hey, the Broncos are in regardless of what happens, unless they completely fall apart. So I do think Denver is probably going to be the better team and make it in there. But I do think it is a good test for both sides when you have two teams fighting for positioning like that. See who's looking good this time of year.
It is. It's interesting because, like, you look at the Colts and they've got 4 games left at the Broncos, and then they get the Giants, Titans, and Jags. Like, if they can beat the Broncos, I think their chances of winning out are pretty high because those 3 teams are all bad. And then you look at the Broncos and it's like Colts, Chargers, Chiefs, and then there's one more in there that I can't quite remember. So it'll be interesting. I'm very excited to kind of track the Broncos and the Colts for the rest of the year. Either way, both teams have to draft players when the year's over. The Colts, just for me, while watching them play, I think it's pretty obvious that they need help at linebacker and tight end mostly. Who do you think are the top prospects at those positions in this draft?
Well, let's start with linebacker because it's not the fun one. It's not very good. My number one linebacker coming out of summer is Barrett Carter-Thompson. I had a late third on him. He's still around there for me. The 2 guys that have had the biggest jump this year is Jalen Walker out of Georgia and Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. Walker's probably going to be the guy in the first round, but he's probably an edge. The reason he's going to go in the first round is because he is more of an outside linebacker that can really rush the passer. If you want to spend a premium pick on a true off-ball guy, it would be Campbell out of Alabama, but he's pretty much the only one. There's a couple guys on day 3, like Stutzman out of OU, Lander Barton out of Utah, that maybe you can take some dart throws on. But as far as upgrading the linebacker position in the draft this year, it's going to be tough to get an immediate contributor. Tight end, on the other hand, is very fun this year. There's kind of a big 2, Colson Loveland out of Michigan and Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Loveland is more of the Kelsey type, that move tight end, really athletic, fantastic receiver. The blocking is a work in progress. Warren is more of a George Kittle type, to complete the analogy, where he is more well-rounded. He is bigger. They use him a lot as a wildcat quarterback. He's super physical with the ball in his hands. And there's a good collection of tier 2 guys after that. Gunnar Helm out of Texas, Eli Stowers out of Vandy, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green, I believe is going to lead the league in receiving yards. Like, he's breaking all kinds of records in the MAC. So there's a bunch of good options at tight end, both premium and more budget options, that I think Indy definitely should dip into that class.
Okay, because that's, I mean, I don't know how much Colts you've seen, but I mean, I don't know. Like this, the revolving door at tight end is not great. It's Granson and Mo Alley Cox and Ogletree and a little bit of Will Mallory, and it's just it's all over the place, really. Last question for you, and I will let you go. What is the premier position in this draft where, like, usually you'd want to draft this position day one, but this year, if you wait till day two, you're still going to find a good guy at that spot?
It's running back for me. And it sounds crazy to say because Ashton Genty's in the class. Like, oh, how could you skip him? But the collection of talent after him is fantastic. I think we're going to see one of those years where I think Genty will probably be the only round one guy. And then you get 9 to 10 backs in the top 100 just flying off the board in rounds 2 and 3, because there's a ton of guys who can be true bell cows, can be your starting RB1, and then that tier 3 of guys that are pass catching specialists or power backs. There's a ton of really good options that I think that's the best class for this year, even if it's a position that people have devalued in the past. I think the explosion of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley combined with this really good class is going to see a pretty big run on running backs earlier than we usually see.
Okay, so running backs, let's go. Do you think that the success of Hunter Henry and Saquon Barkley and the impacts they've had on their offenses could potentially have teams drafting running backs higher than they have in previous years?
Yeah, I still think we're going to have the running back is not a valuable position, but I think we overcorrected a little bit, where everyone just thought you can replace them with anything. And I do think for some of these bad teams, investing in running back might not be the best idea, but some of these middle tier to good teams that are a little bit more foundationally set, I think you can spend a little bit more on a running back, whether it's financially or as a draft pick, to really try and make that offense take a lead. Because we've seen this year with Barkley and Henry and McCaffrey last year with the 49ers that those are 3 very smart organizations that invested in running back, and it improved their offense to massive degrees. And I think this is a copycat league, and that we're going to see a little bit of a correction from a market that probably cratered more than it should have.
Okay, fair enough. Kevin, you were great as always, man. I always appreciate it when you come on.
Yeah, always a pleasure, man.
All right, man.
Appreciate
I
it.
will talk to you later. If I don't talk to you before Christmas, which seems unlikely, I hope you have a Merry Christmas, man.
Sounds good. You too.
See ya. That is Kevin Potts. Follow him on Twitter at KevinPotts06. Check out his Substack as well, Kevin Potts NFL and NFL Draft Breakdowns. Guy does an awesome job over there. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, my thoughts on Indiana, the college football playoff, and more.
Often imitated, never duplicated. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Tickets, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. The Indiana Hoosiers are, because they are officially, as of last night, going to make the college football playoff. The committee ranked them 9th. They'll be the 10th seed. At least that's where they'd be if the ranking, if the playoffs started today, they'd be the 10th seed because Boise State would jump in front of them as the 4 seed, which is really dumb. I hope that they change that next year. Anyway, I don't think there's really a world where they move up. They're not going to drop the loser of the Big Ten or SEC championship game below them. If SMU loses to Clemson, they might drop SMU below Indiana. But if that happened, the winner of Arizona State and Iowa State would jump them, and as would Boise State. So they would still stay at 10. So I'm unaware of any scenario where the Hoosiers move up past the 10 seed. But that's where they belong. That's where they should be. That's the right spot for them. And look, if things hold, the teams ranked in front of them deserve to be ranked in front of them based on resume. They may not actually be better than Indiana, but they deserve to be ranked in front of them. I don't think Penn State, Notre Dame, or SMU is better than Indiana. I don't. But when you look at schedule, when you look at wins and losses and those very important things, like those teams probably deserve, they do deserve to be ranked in front of Indiana. Like Penn State played a slightly tougher schedule. That's why they're playing in the Big Ten title game, and Indiana isn't. Notre Dame's win over Texas A&M is better than any win that Indiana has this year. Notre Dame's win over USC is on par with a lot of the wins that Indiana has. Same goes for the wins over Army, Navy, and Georgia Tech. Those wins they're definitely on par with. They might be even better than some of the wins that Indiana has. Does it bother me that we're just acting like Notre Dame didn't lose to Northern Illinois? Yes, but they have enough wins to justify them being ranked in front of Indiana. I understand it. SMU, they won the ACC, even though their schedule is incredibly easy. They didn't lose a conference game all year. And if they beat Clemson, then that'll be more than enough proof that they deserve to be ranked in front of Indiana. I don't think I have to justify, Texas and Oregon and, Georgia and the rest of the teams and why they're ranked in front of them. The 10 seed is where Indiana belongs because of their schedule. And that's something that's been talked about a lot this year. Okay, it was both, I think, a blessing and a curse for Indiana. Part of why they're in the playoff is because they beat 11 clearly inferior opponents. They played one close game all year. It was against Michigan. They won. Every other game they played was a blowout. And it's good that they blew out the awful teams on their schedule. Okay, and it doesn't matter that they got blown out by Ohio State because Ohio State's one of the best teams in the country, and the committee clearly doesn't really care about it that much. Anyway, I'm curious when it comes to the schedule. How would Indiana be perceived if, they had a non-conference win over a team like Missouri, like an upper middle tier SEC team? Like, would we look at them differently if they had a win over Clemson? Like how different would we view them if they had if they'd played their game against Louisville this year and they'd beaten them instead of playing Western Illinois? I like that would, I think, help. And would they potentially be the 9 seed or maybe even the 8 seed instead? I don't know, but I'm very curious to see how teams go about their schedule going forward because every team across the country is going to have a year like Alabama because of like Indiana, with how big these conferences are now. Like teams are going to have seasons where they don't play the better teams in their conference. Indiana this year played 7 of the bottom 9 teams in their conference. That's an advantage. And every team across the country in every conference is going to have seasons like that. So are we going to see teams schedule a tough non-conference game to combat that potential year where your conference schedule isn't very good? That is something that I'm going to keep my eye on because that's going to play a role in scheduling and how we do college football from here on out. And then, some teams are going to look at Indiana and be like, look, if we just beat all the teams that year, then we'll be in like Indiana is this year. And then other teams are going to look at Miami, who got left out, and be like, we need to play at least one tough non-conference game. Okay, we learned last night that Alabama is going to make the college football playoff over Miami, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Okay, and that upset a lot of people. And as I was scrolling through Twitter, looking at all these very upset fans, I was thinking about the college football playoff committee, and they remind me of my parents from when I was in high school. I have 3 siblings. We're all around the same age, okay? And so my parents would have to make decisions, right? Like, what do we want to eat tonight? Where do we want to go on vacation? Are we going to let Jonathan go out with his friends this night? Are we going to let his siblings go out with their friends on these other nights? Like, they had all these decisions that they had to make. Who gets the car to go to this thing? Like, just a lot of decisions to be made. I do not envy my parents at all, because no matter what decision they made, someone, because they have 4 kids, someone was going to be upset. Okay, and the college football playoff committee is in the exact same spot. No matter what decision they made, whether they opted for Alabama, South Carolina, Ole Miss, or Miami for that final spot, the other 3 fan bases were going to be upset about it. Me personally, I would have gone with South Carolina, but what the committee did made sense. Just like my parents, like looking back, reflecting on the decisions that my parents made, a lot of them were pretty good. And I think that when we look at the history of the college football playoff, we noticed the same thing. A lot of people were upset about Florida State being left out last year. The committee made the right choice. Alabama was way more competitive in that college football playoff than Florida State was against Georgia. They were. It was the correct decision. Okay? So, yeah, like when we look back, I think that we're going to look at what the committee did this year, and we're going to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I think that it makes sense for Ohio State to host a home playoff game. There were people upset last night that Ohio State only fell 4 spots or 5 spots, whatever it was. I think it was 4 spots. People were upset last night that Ohio State fell 4 spots after losing at home to now 7-5 Michigan, while Miami fell 6 spots after losing on the road against 9-3 Syracuse, right? And those 2 things, when you line them up side by side, don't make sense. But you know what does make sense? Ohio State hosting a home playoff game because they're one of the 8 best teams in the country. And I think it makes sense for Miami to be out of the college football playoff because they aren't one of the 12 best teams, and their schedule and their resume proves that. Okay, Alabama's going to be in the college football playoff unless Clemson beats SMU. And that news made a lot of people upset. But they deserve to be in. It makes the most sense. Okay, it makes sense that Alabama gets in over South Carolina, who they beat in head-to-head. It makes sense that Alabama got in over Ole Miss because Alabama played a tougher schedule than Ole Miss. It makes sense that Alabama got in over Miami because they actually beat good teams, unlike Miami. And the people who are like, oh, they just got in because they're Alabama. They just got in because of name bias and all those things. Those people are wrong, and they're just upset that Alabama has a better football program than their favorite school. Everyone who's watched Alabama this year, everyone who has a brain knows that this is not the same Alabama because Nick Saban's not there anymore. Okay? Everyone knows that 9-3 Alabama is not as good as normal. But let's not act like brand's the only reason why they got in. Miami's a huge brand in college football. Lane Kiffin, head coach at Ole Miss, is one of the most polarizing figures in the sport. Alabama was put in over 2 teams that are also big brands and simply aren't as deserving as Alabama is because Alabama has the better resume than both of them. Miami has 2 losses, one to 9-3 Syracuse, who's ranked 22nd, and one to Georgia Tech, who went 7-5. When you look at Miami's schedule, the 2 best teams they played all year were Syracuse and Georgia Tech. They lost both of them. They also have one of the worst defenses in all of Power 4. And look, I get it. They have Cam Ward, and he's amazing and all that good stuff. But that defense is terrible, and that soft schedule cost them their spot in the college football playoff. Alabama didn't get selected over them because their name's Alabama. Alabama was selected over them and Ole Miss because they have wins over Georgia, South Carolina, LSU, and Missouri. Alabama's 4th best win over LSU is better than Miami's best win over Louisville. Alabama is also tied with Georgia and Oregon for the most wins over ranked teams as of right now, teams that finished the year ranked at least. They have 3. You know how many Miami has? 0. You know how many Ole Miss has? 2. Miami's lack of a signature win is why they were left out and Alabama was put in. And that brings up scheduling again. Do we see teams put in a tougher non-conference game so that they don't wind up like Miami? Because if Miami was 10-2 with a win over Missouri, or 10-2 with the win over Illinois, or 10-2 with the win over Texas A&M, I think Miami would have gotten the nod over Alabama because they have one less loss. But they don't have that signature win to hang their hat on, so they were left out in the cold. Speaking of being left out in the cold, that is where the Pacers are trending. Feels like they could miss the playoffs, which would be very disappointing. They lost again last night, and they've got some things to fix, mainly effort stuff. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the Pacers when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you've had a nice week this week. The Pacers have not. They lost again. They've now lost 3 in a row after losing last night on the road against the Toronto Raptors. They lost 122 to 111. They're now 9-13 on the season. And last night, they just dug too big of a hole for themselves. They go down by 24 points, and they have to fight their way back. And I watch a lot of NBA stuff because I don't know why. I don't know why I do. Yeah, I do, because I like it. That's why. Anyway, because I watch so much NBA, like a 24-point lead, like it's a lot, but it's not really a lot because of three-point shooting, right? And we saw the Pacers come storming back last night. The issue, though, is that when you're 25th in the NBA in defensive rating, when you're that bad on defense, you are not climbing out of a 24-point deficit. You just aren't, because you aren't going to be able to get the stops needed to make that happen. Okay? Like the Pacers defensively are just abysmal, right? Like I've got no concerns about the offense. Like the offense hasn't been as good. There's multiple reasons for that. Halliburton's been struggling. Aaron Nesmith hasn't been playing. Andrew Nembhard, he's been out as well. Like I think the injuries are a large part of why the Pacers have struggled offensively this year. But the main concern is defense. Like the defense has been terrible. And the issue is that they just, like, the effort isn't there. And Tyrese Halliburton last night after the game was extremely vocal about the lack of effort from the Pacers.
I think there needs to be a reality check right now, individually and collectively. Guys need to look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves what they can do better. And it starts with me. I have to be a better leader. I got to do everything better and harder because I'm not ready to piss away a year of my career or this organization or this team's season. So everybody's got to come together collectively, figure out what we can do better. It's part of the growing pains. I mean, listen, we're 9-13 right now. We can act like the world is falling apart, and that's not the case. But there also needs to be a sense of urgency, and everybody can keep saying, oh, it's 4 games, we'll be back to 500. It ain't that easy. Guys, like I said, it's a reality check individually and collectively because we have to put a better product on the floor. I think as a group in the game of basketball, you have to control what you can. You cannot control if you make every shot. You can't control substitution patterns. You can't control stuff like that, but you can control how hard you're going to play. You can control your energy and your spirit. Those are all controllable things. So, like I said, everybody's got to do a little bit of a gut check themselves in the mirror, and figure out what we can do better. We play a Brooklyn team tomorrow that plays hard as ever. Hard as this team. But every game, we keep saying, well, this team plays hard. This team plays. It's the NBA. Everybody plays hard. Everybody wants something bigger. And we should be a part of that. We want more than what we have right now. So, like I said, collectively, we got to be better. But I do think the main thing is effort, and our spirit's got to be right. And, how can we get better on a night-to-night basis?
Tyrese Halliburton right there explaining the lack of effort and how everyone kind of needs to check themselves and to figure their stuff out. And look, like he's right. It's very simple for the Pacers. They have more than enough offensive talent between Siakam and Halliburton being an all-NBA guy. And if he keeps playing well like he did last night, that is the one silver lining. He finally played a good game on the road, had 30 points on 10 of 16 shooting. Like they're going to be fine on offense. I'm not worried about that. It's the defense. Like the effort isn't there. You can see it. They allow way too many blow-bys. They don't rotate quickly. It's just there's a lack of intensity on that end of the floor. And the numbers back it up. They are 25th in defensive rating this year. And last year, well, Jonathan, it's the same roster. They weren't very good on defense last year. True, except let's look at the final 21 games of the season last year. That is after the All-Star break. During the 21-game stretch to end the season, the Pacers were 11th in defensive rating with a very similar roster to what they have right now. They've played 22 games this year, and they're 26th. That tells me that they just aren't defending with the same level of intensity at the start of this year that they were at the end of last year. They have to be better. The effort has to be there. Like, what's the difference between now and then? I think that is an important question that we have to ask. The Pacers were competing for a top 6 seed at that time during that 21 game stretch to end last year. They aren't doing that right now. But, honestly, the effort should be there because they're competing to just make the playoffs as of right now. Right? But it's early. There's 3/4 of the season left, 60 games left to go. So maybe the urgency just isn't there. It needs to be. It needs to be there. Or maybe they're just content. Maybe the Eastern Conference Finals run that they made last year, in part because the Knicks and Bucks were banged up, maybe it's gotten to their head. Maybe this team just hasn't handled success very well. Some people, they experience success, and then they're like, cool, I'm good. Other people experience success, and they're like, ooh, I would like to experience more of that. And maybe the Pacers are more of the former than they are of the latter. Maybe they think that they're good enough because they made an Eastern Conference Finals run. Maybe they think that they're good enough to turn it on whenever they want and turn it off whenever they need to. Maybe that's the issue. And that if that is the issue, then that's a major concern because they're 9-13. You would think that the lack of winning would indicate that they can't just turn it on and off like, Boston probably can, like the Lakers can to some extent, like the Warriors can, who were really good. I don't know if you watched them play last night. They played the Nuggets, and the Warriors are fun to watch. Jokic, that dude's he's insane. Anyway, maybe that's the issue. And I hope that it is, right? And hopefully they realize that they aren't that good. You say, well, Jonathan, how'd you say that? They made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They're 9-13 right now. They clearly aren't that good. They have to start playing better. They have to find a way to get stops. That is ultimately why they're losing games, because you're going to have games where shots don't go in. And when that happens, you have to get stops to keep yourself in games. So there's that. Pacers got to start playing just a little bit of defense, and then things may or may not turn around for you. I'd be willing to bet that they would. The Hoosiers won last night. It was nice. I didn't see any fire Mike Woodson tweets on my timeline, which is nice. That usually doesn't happen after Indiana games. They dominated Sam Houston State, which isn't surprising in the slightest. Their next game, it should be on Monday when they play Minnesota. First Big Ten game of the year. Going to have Coach Ben Johnson on the Dan Dockett Show Friday, hopefully at 12:30. That is the tentative time as of right now. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen to my show. I greatly appreciate it. I'll be back on the air tomorrow from 10 to noon. It's going to be a great show. Can't wait to kind of get everything rolling there. The Dan Dockett Show comes your way here in about 4.5 minutes. I'll be back on the air to talk to you tomorrow from 10 to noon.